If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true and untold stories from the Wild West. This one will leave you speechless. A black rancher, known only by the name Elias, had lived in absolute solitude for over 15 years. His ranch, nestled between vast hills and surrounded by silence, hadn't received a single visitor in all that time. The wind was his only companion, the horses his only family, and the stars above his nightly conversation. Every creak of the wood in the barn, every rustle in the grass, had become familiar to him. But on one fateful morning, that silence was broken. Hoofbeats, many of them, echoed in the distance. Elias stopped what he was doing, turned his ear, and narrowed his eyes toward the horizon. Dust was rising. From that cloud of dust emerged something completely unexpected, a group of women, dressed in black and white, riding horses with an elegance that contrasted with the dusty trail behind them. They were nuns. At first, Elias thought he was imagining things. It had been so long since he'd seen people, especially a group like this, that his mind struggled to accept it. But as they drew closer, their habits flapping in the wind, and their faces filled with determination, he knew this wasn't a vision. These were real people, and they were heading straight toward his ranch. Elias stepped out of the barn, his boots kicking gravel, his heart pounding like a drum. The lead nun, a woman with silver hair and piercing green eyes, introduced herself as Sister Agnes. Her voice was calm but firm, and her words carried weight. "We've ridden far," she said. "We heard about this place and hoped you might offer us shelter, just for a short while." Elias, still stunned, nodded slowly. He hadn't spoken to another human in years. His voice was rough from disuse, and emotion cracked through his first words. You're welcome," he stammered. The sisters dismounted, their movements graceful yet heavy with exhaustion. It was clear they had traveled far, and something told Elias this wasn't just a casual visit, they were running from something. Inside the modest ranch house, Elias offered them water, bread, and a place to rest. As the sisters settled in, their eyes scanned the walls, the handmade furniture, the old fireplace that hadn't seen company in over a decade. Sister Agnes explained that they were fleeing persecution. In a nearby territory, tensions had risen, and their convent had been set ablaze by angry raiders. They had saved what little they could and escaped on horseback. Elias listened, his fists clenched in quiet anger. The West was wild, yes, but targeting women of faith, it crossed a line he couldn't ignore. He assured them they were safe now. "Ain't nobody gonna lay a hand on you here," he promised. Days passed, and the sisters began to bring life back to the silent ranch. They cleaned, sang hymns at dawn, and planted herbs in the dusty garden. Elias, who once moved like a ghost across his land, began smiling. He even joined in their songs, his deep voice humming through the halls like a cello. One afternoon, Sister Maria, the youngest of the group, asked him, "Why do you live alone?" Elias paused. The truth weighed heavy. Years ago, his family had been ambushed by outlaws while traveling to a nearby town. He survived. They didn't. Since that day, he'd built this ranch as a refuge from the world that took everything from him. "I stopped needing people," he said quietly, "until you all showed up." The ranch was silent as ever, but that day, something shifted in the wind. Elijah was out fixing a fence when he spotted a cloud of dust rising over the distant trail. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, it wouldn't be the first time. But as the dust grew, he saw outlines, horses. And not just cowboys or wanderers, but women, all dressed in long black and white garments, riding together in perfect formation. Nuns. The sight hit Elijah like a hammer. He hadn't seen another human face up close in over a decade, let alone a group like this. As they drew closer, he straightened his back and removed his hat, not out of politeness, but because his heart raced with confusion. What could a group of nuns possibly want from him? Were they lost? Were they in danger? Had someone sent them? The horses came to a halt just past his corral. One of the nuns, the oldest among them, dismounted slowly. Her name was Sister Miriam, and her eyes were as sharp as any lawman's. "We heard you might still be here," she said calmly, like they were old friends. Elijah didn't respond at first. His voice felt trapped in a throat unused to speech. He finally managed to ask what they wanted. Sister Miriam explained they were sent to restore an old mission nearby, a mission that had once served the native tribes and was now in ruins. But they needed help. Tools, shelter, food, and maybe, just maybe, someone who knew the land. Elijah looked at them like they were spirits, sent from a world he had long forgotten. Why now? Why him? Still, he didn't say no. He gestured toward the well, the barn, the storage shed. The nuns thanked him with warm smiles and dismounted, leading their horses to water. Elijah felt his pulse thunder in his ears. For the first time in 15 years, he was not alone. That night, he watched them through the cracks of his old shutters, listening to their soft hymns rising into the night air. They cooked simply, cleaned without complaint, and prayed with a peace that made the land feel alive again. Elijah sat in silence at his dinner table, food untouched. Memories stirred, of his wife's voice, of a child's laughter, of a church bell that once rang before everything fell apart. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the sun rose on a ranch transformed by presence. The nuns were already up, cleaning the water troughs, mending their own saddlebags, and organizing supplies. Elijah watched them from the porch, one hand resting on the rifle beside him. Not out of fear, but out of habit. Sister Miriam approached again, kindly but firm. "Will you help us, Mr. Elijah?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked out toward the hills. Then he nodded once. A small motion, but it meant everything. That day, he rode with them to the ruins of the old mission. The building was broken, weeds growing through the cracks, but the foundation was still strong. Just like him. He began working beside them, teaching them how to reinforce beams, clear brush, and patch old roofs. The silence of the past 15 years slowly gave way to the rhythm of hammers, the scrape of stone, and the soft, unwavering voices of nuns in prayer. Elijah didn't speak much, but his actions were loud. He showed them where the water ran strongest, where snakes hid, where the land turned sour. And at night, he listened to their stories by lantern light. Stories of orphanages they'd helped build, of people they'd saved, of faith that never gave up even when the world seemed cruel. Elijah began to feel something he hadn't in decades: belonging. The next morning, Brother Thomas rode up alone, his expression tight, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He dismounted and approached the rancher with the same caution one uses around a wounded animal. The rancher didn't speak, didn't offer a chair, didn't ask what he wanted. But Thomas wasn't deterred. He explained that the nuns came from a mission 2 towns away, that they had suffered damage from a wildfire and were seeking temporary shelter. The rancher crossed his arms, glanced at the barn, and muttered something about people always wanting something from him. But Thomas left a message: "They ain't here to change you. Just need rest." And then he rode off, leaving behind a silence even heavier than before. That night, the rancher stood on his porch staring at the sky. The wind whispered through the grass like voices from a past he tried to bury. He remembered voices that once filled this ranch: a child's laughter, a woman's song in the kitchen, boots on the wooden floor. Now, only echoes remained. He stared at the empty rocking chair beside him, and for the first time in years, he considered the possibility that silence wasn't peace, it was punishment. When the sun began to rise, casting golden lines across the valley, he saddled up his horse and rode toward the mission where the nuns had set up camp beside the old trail. The camp was simple: canvas tents, smoke from a small fire, the sound of hymnals rising in the morning air. When the rancher arrived, a few nuns looked up, startled by the sudden appearance of the man everyone warned them about. Sister Agnes stepped forward, calm and kind. "You must be the rancher," she said. He didn't nod, didn't speak, just stared. Then finally he said, Y'all need a roof. It wasn't a question. She smiled, as if that was more than enough. He pointed his chin west, toward his land. 3 days. You come. You leave. She nodded in agreement, understanding that 3 days could be the difference between survival and nothing. On the first evening, as the nuns arrived on horseback, the rancher watched from a distance. They moved like shadows in the golden dust, graceful and foreign against the rugged backdrop of his land. They brought supplies, tools, and a quiet sense of purpose. The barn became their quarters, and the old cookhouse was revived with the smell of bread and stew. The rancher stayed out of sight, observing. But when Sister Mary offered him a small bowl of stew without a word, he took it. The heat from the food stirred something deep, a hunger not just for nourishment, but for connection, for something more than the ghosts that haunted his days. The second day brought more than work. One of the younger nuns, Sister Eloise, sat outside humming as she patched torn fabric. Her voice was soft, but it carried. The rancher, who had been tending to the cattle fence nearby, paused. That melody, it was the same tune his wife used to hum while rocking their baby to sleep. His hand froze on the post. He stood there, silent, watching the young woman, memories crashing in like thunder on dry soil. That night he didn't sleep. He sat in the old wooden chair, facing the dark, wondering if the past had returned to test him or to heal him. The nuns didn't ask questions. They didn't push into his space. They tended their chores, shared what little they had, and respected his silence. But they changed things. Laughter echoed in the barn. Chores were done with humming and songs. A hand-stitched curtain appeared in his kitchen. The table, long untouched, held bowls and bread again. It wasn't invasion, it was transformation, slow and gentle. Even the animals sensed it. The old dog, who once never left the porch, now followed Sister Agnes through the fields like a loyal sentinel. And the rancher began to feel it too, a warmth blooming through the cracks of his guarded life. By the end of the third day, something shifted. The rancher stood at the door as Sister Agnes approached him with a quiet smile. "We'll leave at first light," she said. He nodded. But his eyes betrayed him. There was something else there, a pull, a hesitation. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, he said, "Stay a bit longer. Help fix the chapel." The chapel had been empty for 12 years, its roof half gone, its altar rotting. She turned back slowly. "We'd be honored," she said. And with that, something invisible snapped. The walls around his heart cracked just enough to let light through. Rebuilding the chapel became a sacred ritual. The rancher, once solitary and grim, worked beside the nuns. He didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. His presence was steady, his hands skilled. The chapel's old wood echoed with new voices, and each beam lifted into place was like laying a piece of his soul back where it belonged. At night, he found himself standing in the doorway, watching the flicker of lanterns and hearing the soft murmur of prayer. He didn't join them. Not yet. But he listened. And sometimes he found himself whispering along, not to them, but to the woman he had lost, to the child he still dreamed of. Sister Eloise began painting the altar. She had a gift for color, and as her brush moved, life seemed to bloom on the wood. One afternoon, the rancher approached. "That blue," he said, "same as her eyes." He didn't say who. He didn't need to. Sister Eloise smiled gently. "Then let's make it her altar," she said. And together, they painted in silence, two souls connected by grief and grace. The chapel, once abandoned, became a beacon. Travelers stopped. Locals wandered in. They all noticed the change, not just in the building, but in the man who now greeted them with a quiet nod, a handshake, sometimes even a story. One evening, under the crimson sky, Sister Agnes sat beside the rancher on the porch. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice light. He chuckled, a sound unfamiliar, rough from disuse. "I used to scare myself," he replied. She looked at him, seeing the man beneath the myths, beneath the grief. "You've been alone too long." He nodded. 15 years too long. She placed a hand on his arm. "Then let's not waste another minute." That night, the rancher stood by the chapel and lit a lantern. Its light spread across the yard, and for the first time in years, he left the door open. Word of the changes spread through the region like wildfire. The ranch that once inspired whispers and warnings now became a sanctuary. People brought supplies, shared stories, left prayers at the chapel's door. The rancher didn't chase them off. In fact, he welcomed them. Not with grand speeches, but with actions. A fixed wagon, a shared meal, a place to rest. The land, once silent and stiff with grief, now pulsed with purpose. The cattle thrived, the fields stretched green again, and laughter became part of the air. And through it all, the rancher stood tall, no longer haunted, but healed by faith, by presence, by love that expected nothing in return. A young boy arrived one day, riding alone, carrying only a satchel and a photo. He said his mother told him to find the black man who fixes lost things. The rancher took the photo. It was Sister Eloise, years older. She had passed away after returning to her home country, but not before telling her son where to find hope. The rancher offered him a home, a place to work, to learn, to grow. And in that child's laughter, he heard the echo of the family he thought he had lost. In that boy's eyes, he saw his future, not written in solitude, but in shared life. As the seasons turned, the rancher aged, but he never returned to silence. The chapel continued to gather souls. The land remained generous. And every night, as he sat by the fire, he would take out an old photograph of his wife and daughter, smiling in front of the porch. He'd whisper stories to them, telling them how strangers became family, how faith rebuilt what grief destroyed. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he swore he could hear them laughing, not from memory, but from somewhere closer. Somewhere home. And so, the black rancher who once lived in fear and silence became a legend, not for what he endured, but for what he gave. His story traveled on horseback, in songs, in prayers. Travelers would pause at the chapel, leave flowers, ask about the man who healed others by letting himself be healed. And though his name faded with time, his legacy did not. It remained in the soil, in the laughter of children, in the hymns that rose with the dawn. He was no longer feared. He was remembered. And in that, he found the peace he thought he had buried long ago. The ranch still stands, a little weathered, a little wiser. The chapel bells ring every Sunday morning. The boy, now a man, runs the cattle and teaches the next generation to ride, to pray, to mend what's broken. And every year on the same day, a gathering forms at the chapel. They light candles, share stories, and look to the porch where an old hat still hangs, untouched. It's not mourning. It's gratitude. For a man who once built walls so high even God had to knock twice. And when he finally opened the door, the whole world stepped through. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you feel, remember, or simply pause, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are many more untold stories like this one waiting to be shared. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment. Leave a comment telling us your favorite part, and help us keep these powerful narratives alive. Every view, like, and share helps us continue this journey of bringing forgotten voices and hidden histories to light. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to the ranch one last time.